bring up my co-moderator, Kristen, and the speakers can go to the chairs. Kristen is the performance and food allergy dietitian at Stanford University and formerly served as the director of sports nutrition at Stanford for 10 years. Kristen and I still share patients together, so we chat almost weekly, at least every other week, on just how we can optimize nutrition, oftentimes in female athletes. And so I'm really excited to co-moderate with you, and I think we'll both just head over to the chair.
Well, thank you for that intro. I really appreciate all the speakers today. I think it just is a nice snapshot of just how much work is being done in the nutrition space, and especially thinking about our female athletes as well. And to give a little background on top of what Emily was saying, I've worked in the space of sports nutrition my entire career thus far, and have worked at 3 different elite D1 institutions, but the last 10 years of those were directing at Stanford. And with that, also I'm working with the WNBA. So my area of expertise has really become the female athletes, our weight class sport and aesthetic sport, which ends up being the student athletes and the professional athletes that have the most trouble feeling in the first place. So an area near and dear to my heart. And so when I actually had the opportunity to work with Dr. Fredericson, as he mentioned, and his team, and I think one of the most impactful things was not just seeing the change that we got to see in the injury prevention, but also what he started to mention about the culture, right? That you have athletes that have gone through now 4 years of this study, of the intervention, of building further relationship and education, and being able to see how those juniors and seniors were not only making changes for themselves and prioritizing their health and nutrition differently, but then also impacting the rest of the team and the incomers to just create that next generation of better fueling. That was really cool to see. And so obviously it's important that our athletes, and especially our female athletes, are thinking about their health, their well-being, and prioritizing strategies around sleep, and thinking about their intake diversity. Sometimes it's not always the convenient things that they want that are just in front of them, or the things that they're craving, but looking at that long-term health. And I think sometimes that comes at the expense of that quick fix that everyone's looking for and the athletes always want, but looking more strategically at how can we look at your whole season and peak where you want to peak, or look at your entire career and think about your goals and not just this one moment. And so I think Dr. Fred said this nicely, in that if we want to create impact, we have to really look at the environment, and we have to be thinking about how can we, in this case, cut through the noise and all those trends, and really empower our female athletes in the science, and help them get through that, and the nuances of how can we help you actually peak your performance with your body, what can you do, how can we remove some of those barriers to do that. So anyway, with that said, I want to kick off the questions today, and I have a great gut health question for you first. When we think about female athletes, often have a lot of or complain of gut distress during certain parts of their menstrual cycle. Are there any things, knowing as we're thinking about the gut microbiome and what we know, and as well as fermented foods, is there anything that we could think about in terms of helping mitigate some of those symptoms during the hormonal phases, and or anything that we should be cautious about as they're thinking about this?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that your microbiome is unique to you. So each one of us has a different microbiome. And so it's very hard to have like blanket statements of, this type of food is better for your gut. And so actually when we do our studies, when we did that fermented food study, we told participants, eat whatever fermented foods you want. And some people really loved fermented dairy. Some people drank a bunch of kombucha. Some people did a mix. And so, often when people ask me gut health questions, I say, unfortunately, we're not at a phase where I can give you a very precise recommendation. We know that fermented foods are really good for gut health. We know that diets that are high in dietary fiber really promote a healthy microbiome, and that mucus layer that I showed you, to keep that mucus lining intact, we really need to provide food for our microbiome, which is dietary fiber. But how you get that fermented food or how you get that dietary fiber may be very dependent on your unique microbiome. So what I usually tell people is like, try different types of fermented food, try different types of high fiber foods and see how you feel. Like, oh, this food is making me feel really bloated. Or I just spoke to a woman in our mom study that was like, every time I drank coconut water kefir, in 20 minutes, I was running to the bathroom. And I learned pretty quick, like that fermented food does not match me. And so, I just tell people, like, experiment with yourself at maybe different points of your cycle and just say, oh, when I eat this food at this point, like I feel better, I have more regular bowel movements and don't feel as bloated or whatever.
Thank you. And that just goes to show, I feel like a lot of nutrition pieces are just so individualized.
Yeah.
It goes back to that. Yeah.
All right, I have a question for Dr. Panda, and I maybe have led you to this question before we started, but some of the research out there talks about high-fat, low-carb, especially in female endurance athletes, maybe not having positive performance outcomes. Can you speak to that? And is it about the nutrient timing? Are they not timing their fueling well enough, or are there other nuances to the science?
Yeah, there are a lot of differences between what we do in mice and what happens in real life. One is all our experiments in mice, those mice are genetically identical, whereas in humans, we are genetically different from each other. So maybe we need a larger cohort to see an effect. Second is nutrition scientists know that it's really hard to get good nutrition data from people, and surveys are not the best way. And we run a large study through our app called My Circadian Clock, and we see a huge discrepancy between what people say they're eating and what actually they eat, because they have to take pictures of everything and then we can figure out what they eat. So in that context, I think what our study is triggering people to think is to go back and do much better nutrition intervention studies. And at the same time, coming to another point about microbiome, we also don't know how the gut microbiome of individual person is adapting to an abrupt change in nutrition, because I may go from not normal chow, but a low carb, high carb diet to a high protein diet, but is my gut microbe changing to absorb and process that? So there are a lot of questions, and the good thing is when you do an experiment that raises more questions, that's more exciting because there are so many ways it can go, and that's what is exciting for us. Okay.
Awesome. Very good. Dr. Fredericson, I have a question for you as well. So we obviously got to see how there was a difference in the two institutions' results, and there was just kind of a trend that at UCLA that there were continued to be high injuries with the turnover. I'm curious what you think that that it illustrates for the impact of change at the coaching or support staff levels in terms of athlete health overall, and what we might be able to do to help mitigate some of that in terms of helping with the continuity of care going forward.
Yeah, so based on the results of the study I presented, we were funded by the Pac-12. The Pac-12 then asked us to introduce this to all the Pac-12 schools. And I have to say it was really challenging because a lot of the schools don't even have a dietitian, like one dietitian. You'd be amazed. So we got 6 schools to enroll and then follow them over a couple-year period. But the goal was nutrition. We just were trying to offer an education program. What we did find is we looked at these behavioral models of change, and most of the athletes were not in the readiness. In other words, they were not ready psychologically to actually make a change. In fact, most of them thought they were in positive energy balance, and most of them were not. But in their head, they were fine. So I think to change the culture, you also have to change the athlete's ability to receptivity to a change. And that's, you can tell them things all day long, but you have to create the culture where they're open to that. So.
Yeah, and fair and fair. Unfortunately, I feel like oftentimes it's an injury that drives the change. Like the bone stress injury that then says, okay, now I need to make the change, which is almost
or it
reverse.
Takes a couple injuries
Yeah.
until it really
right.
sinks in.
Right.
Yeah.
See that too.
Yeah.
Right.
I was really intrigued by the mouse study, and as a clinician that's always trying to get my patients to be eating higher fat diets, I'm wondering more about the composition of the fats that you like, saturated, unsaturated, omega-3. What did you do with the addition that you did for the high fat diet for your mice?
Yeah, so this is the garden variety high fat diet, which is typically for mouse, it's lard, but then now the next generation experiments that we are doing, we are changing the diet. So the major portion of the fat comes from fish oil or olive oil. And those will be the more refined studies, and we hope that we can repeat some of the outcomes.
Refined mice. Okay.
Hi. Thank you for your wonderful talks. I have heard a little bit about the benefits or drawbacks of intermittent fasting or fasted training and how they affect energy availability during the day and during training. And I was wondering if the efficacy of fasted training or intermittent fasting vary throughout the menstrual cycle.
That's a hard question to answer because as I mentioned, we do most of our experiments in mice. But through this my circadian clock app, we get a lot of feedback from people. What we find in general is particularly women who are trying to do everything perfect. They're trying to do the popular version of intermittent fasting, that is 6 hours of eating or 8 hours of eating, which we do not actually recommend to our patients. We do 9 to 10 hours. And then they reduce their caloric intake and they run more. So they get into relative energy deficit. So that's the challenge. And then in mouse experiment, most of the running that we do, we don't actually run the mice in the fasted state. They eat, and then after 2 hours, we kind of take them to the treadmill and then run them. So those are some nuances, what we do in mice. And then in humans, it's very complex and also very varied from person to person.
Emily, I have a question for Mike about the Healthy Runner Project and Kristen. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So it's amazing you dropped injuries by half from your expertise, the intervention, Kristen, Emily, like very consistent team culture. And I get that you can't, then you expanded and they can't reproduce what we did here. But have we been able to reproduce? Has it stayed down or has it gone back up, or do you know?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that question. I mean, to be honest, it has gone up a bit. I think part of that is that we lost funding. We were funded through the Pac-12 to get a number of blood tests and to get the bone density tests. And so I think that helped, just collecting that information. We can get some of that now, but it's more difficult. And also, Kristen isn't with us anymore. So, and I think having a really good dietitian who really connects with the athletes is so important. And nothing against the people we have now, but Kristen is very special. And I think that made a big difference. So hopefully, over time we can get it back to where it was because it has gone up a bit. But Coach Clark and I have been talking about that. So.
I think that I appreciate those very kind words, but I think that the draw of being able to get the DEXA and some of that additional data really helped them buy in, and they had these mandatory nutrition pieces they did with that, and we did a lot of small group stuff. And so then when you're trying to do that just with the whole team or trying to fit that into the regular schedule, it just becomes a little different also. Not in a bad way, like we absolutely prioritized it still. But I think that gave some additional benefit that the student athletes saw tangibly that they could get that data for themselves. So I think even being able to fund that part would be able to build some of that back.
And just to add to this was a 7-year study. And so when I was a resident, I was recruiting or involved in seeing these athletes year to year. And when they were seniors, they were excited about the Healthy Runner Project. They would get a lot of the blood work, but they knew the routine, they knew why they were there. And so the culture was very ingrained into the system. And so you had these ambassadors, and it almost like the team captains were excited about optimizing nutrition, and it was a priority. So I think that was a big factor too.
Oh yeah, it made a big difference. I mean, when the team captains buy in, it really helps a lot. Or if the team captains are not good role models.
Right.
You know, if your team captain is, hate to say it, rail thin and barely eating, the rest of the athletes often will follow. And so little things like that just make a big difference in team culture.
Kate.
Hi. Hi. My question is for Dr. Panda. I really appreciate all the data on time-restricted eating, intermittent fasting, you know, whatever verbiage. And I actually remember you presented a couple years on it at one of the other, I think it was another FASTR meeting that we had, and there was less data on the athlete performance side of it and more just like in the general population. So I really like seeing kind of your research progress, but I am curious, it is hard for most athletes to do time-restricted feeding because of the demands of an athletic schedule, especially in collegiate athletes. You have 6 a.m. practices and 7 p.m. lifts, et cetera. Is there a minimum amount of fasting that you can get some still effect where we're kind of able to balance a very challenging athlete schedule with some of the potential benefits?
Yeah, so that's a good question and practical question. So what we say is minimum 12 hours of fasting is good for everybody. So I say anyone from 10-year-old to 100-year-old, whatever you do, should be able to practice that. And then the second thing that is not well discussed in the media is actually, even if you're eating 3 meals and the total span is at 12 to 13 hours, eating those meals regularly around the same time, say 7 a.m., noon, and then 7 p.m.
Right.
That itself also has a lot of benefits. And those researches are coming out of Europe recently. And we kind of forget that consistent meal timing, even over a long period of time, eating time, also has benefit.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Those little tweaks maybe to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
All right, we're done. Thank you.